In the heart of ancient Britain, during the tumultuous era of Roman occupation, lived a queen whose name would echo through millennia as a symbol of fierce resistance, Boudica d'Ortai. She was the ruler of the Iceni tribe, a Celtic people who inhabited a region in what is now modern-day Norfolk. Boudica's husband, Prasutagus, was the king of the Iceni, a client king who had nominally maintained his kingdom's independence by allying with Rome. Upon his death in 60 AD, Prasutagus sought to preserve his family's legacy and the fragile peace by bequeathing his kingdom jointly to his two daughters and the Roman emperor, Nero. Catti. This was a common practice for client kings, a desperate gamble to ensure a smooth transition and protect their lineage. However, the Roman authorities in Britain had other plans, viewing Prasutagus' death as an opportunity for complete annexation and plunder. They completely ignored the king's will, a profound insult to Celtic custom and a blatant act of Roman arrogance. The Iceni kingdom was declared Roman property, its lands confiscated, and its nobility treated as slaves. The royal household was systematically looted, and the wealth of the Iceni aristocracy was seized by Roman creditors. When Boudica dared to protest this injustice, she was subjected to the ultimate humiliation. By order of the Roman procurator, Catus Decianus, the queen was publicly flogged, a punishment reserved for common criminals. In an even more horrific act of barbarity, her two young daughters were brutally raped by Roman soldiers. This monstrous violation of her family and her royal status was the spark that ignited a firestorm of rebellion. The personal agony of a mother and queen transformed into the collective rage of a subjugated people. Word of the atrocities spread like wildfire, and the Iceni, pushed beyond the limits of endurance, rose up in a furious revolt. Boudica, a towering figure with fiery red hair that cascaded down to her waist, became the rebellion's charismatic and terrifying leader. Her voice, described as harsh and commanding, rallied thousands to her banner. She was joined by the neighboring Trinovantes tribe, who had their own deep-seated grievances against the Romans. The Trinovantes particularly resented the construction of a massive temple dedicated to the deified Emperor Claudius in their former capital, Camulodunum Ponte. This temple was built on confiscated land and funded by the Trinovantes themselves, a constant, humiliating reminder of their conquest. The rebellion's first target was Camulodunum, modern-day Colchester, the very symbol of Roman oppression. The city was a colonia, a settlement for discharged Roman legionaries, and was poorly defended. The Roman governor, Gaius Suetonius Paulinus, was away on a campaign in Anglesey, Wales, the stronghold of the Druids. The Britons descended upon Camulodunum with overwhelming force and terrifying speed. The Roman veterans, caught completely by surprise, mounted a desperate but futile defense. The city was overrun in 2 days of brutal fighting and merciless slaughter. The last Roman defenders took refuge in the Temple of Claudius, holding out for 2 days before it was stormed and burned to the ground. Archaeological evidence from Colchester reveals a thick layer of burnt destruction, a testament to the fury of Boudica's army. No one was spared. Men, women, and children were massacred in a wave of retributive violence. The Roman 9th Legion, Legio Naevis Hispana, attempted to relieve the city but was ambushed and annihilated. The infantry was completely wiped out, with only the commander and some of his cavalry managing to escape. The procurator, Catus Decianus, whose greed had precipitated the crisis, fled in terror to Gaul. With Camulodunum in ashes, Boudica turned her attention to the burgeoning commercial center of Londinium, modern-day London. Suetonius Paulinus, having received news of the disaster, marched his legions with incredible speed back from Wales. He arrived at Londinium before Boudica's army, but made a difficult and pragmatic decision. The city was indefensible, a sprawling settlement of merchants and traders without protective walls. To attempt to defend it would mean the certain destruction of his army, Rome's only hope of retaining the province. He chose to sacrifice the city to save his legions and fight another day on ground of his own choosing. The inhabitants of Londinium who could not flee were subjected to the same fate as those in Camulodunum. The city was burned to the ground, and its population was systematically exterminated. The Roman historian Tacitus wrote that some 70,000 Romans and their allies perished in the 3 sacked cities. From Londinium, the rebel army marched on to Verulamium, modern day Sinobans, Shishi, Aplionte, Odai, Oliashunabate, Kamishibune, and Ontondesi. Verulamium, another pro-Roman town, was also put to the torch and its people slaughtered. In a matter of weeks, Boudica's rebellion had laid waste to the 3 most significant Roman centers in southern Britain. The rebellion had become a direct and existential threat to Roman rule in the province. Suetonius Paulinus, having regrouped his forces, finally prepared to confront Boudica's massive army. He commanded a force of approximately 10,000 men, including legionaries, auxiliaries, and cavalry. In stark contrast, Boudica's army was a colossal horde, estimated by some ancient sources to be over 200,000 strong. However, the Britons were not a professional army. They were a tribal levy, including women and children who had come to watch the expected victory. Suetonius, a master tactician, carefully selected the battlefield to nullify the Britons' numerical superiority. He chose a location with a narrow entrance, protected on the flanks by dense woods, possibly along the Roman road known as Watling Street. This would prevent the Britons from surrounding his smaller force and force them into a frontal assault. Before the battle, Boudica rode among her warriors in a chariot, with her daughters beside her. She delivered a powerful speech, reminding them of the Romans' injustices and urging them to fight for their freedom or die. She declared that this was a battle for liberation, not for the recovery of her kingdom, but for vengeance against tyranny. The Britons, confident in their overwhelming numbers, surged forward in a disorganized, howling wave. The Romans stood their ground, silent and disciplined, waiting for the enemy to come within range. As the Britons charged into the narrow defile, Suetonius gave the order to attack. The legionaries unleashed a devastating volley of their heavy javelins, the pila. The pila were designed to bend upon impact, rendering enemy shields useless and causing chaos in the charging ranks. The initial charge of the Britons faltered, their momentum broken by the disciplined Roman volley. Then, the Romans advanced in their classic wedge formation, a disciplined, unstoppable force of shields and swords. The superior training, armor, and tactics of the Roman legionaries proved decisive. The Britons, packed tightly into the narrow space, had no room to maneuver or effectively use their long swords. Roman auxiliary infantry and cavalry then charged in from the flanks, completing the encirclement. The battle turned into a horrific slaughter. The Britons tried to flee, but their escape was blocked by the very wagons of their own families that they had placed at their rear. The Romans showed no mercy, slaughtering not only the warriors, but also the women, children, and even the animals in the baggage train. Tacitus claims that 80,000 Britons were killed, while Roman losses were a mere 400. The Great Rebellion was crushed in a single, bloody afternoon. Boudica's fate is not definitively known, but Tacitus reports that she took poison to avoid the humiliation of capture. Her death marked the end of large-scale resistance to Roman rule in southern Britain. In the aftermath, Suetonius unleashed punitive campaigns across the lands of the rebel tribes, devastating the countryside. The level of destruction was so severe that it led to famine among the Britons who had not even fought. The rebellion had shaken Rome to its core. Emperor Nero even considered abandoning the province of Britain altogether. However, Rome ultimately chose to stay, replacing the harsh military rule with more conciliatory administrators. The Romans began a program of Romanization that was more diplomatic, aiming to win the hearts and minds of the provincial elites. For For centuries, her memory faded into relative obscurity. It was during the reign of Queen Elizabeth I that her story was rediscovered, and she began her transformation into a national icon. The Victorians, in particular, embraced Boudica as a powerful symbol of the British Empire and female strength. They saw in this ancient Celtic queen a kindred spirit to their own powerful monarch, Queen Victoria. In 1902, a magnificent bronze statue of Boudica in her war chariot was erected on the Victoria Embankment in London, next to the Houses of Parliament. Ironically, she now stands as a celebrated hero in the very city she once burned to the ground. Boudica's rebellion was a catastrophic failure in the short term, resulting in immense suffering and death. Yet, her legacy endures as a timeless and powerful story of a fight for freedom against an oppressive empire. She remains a potent symbol of defiance, a queen who chose to fight and die rather than submit to tyranny. The tale of the Celtic Queen who burned Roman London serves as a stark reminder that the spirit of freedom can never be truly extinguished. Her story began not with war, but with a desperate attempt at diplomacy. The Roman financial system, with its predatory loans, had also ensnared the Iceni elite. The confiscation of their estates was justified by the Romans as repayment of these debts. The flogging of a royal figure was an unprecedented act, designed to utterly break the spirit of the Iceni. Instead of breaking them, it forged them into a weapon of vengeance. Boudica's army was not just soldiers, it was an entire people on the move, a migrating force of fury. The Druids, recently suppressed by Suetonius in Anglesey, likely played a role in fueling the spiritual and ideological fervor of the rebellion. The attack on Camalodunum was timed perfectly to coincide with the governor's absence. The inhabitants of Camalodunum had been arrogant and cruel to their Briton neighbors, adding to the hatred against them. The Britons used siege tactics that were rudimentary but brutally effective against an unprepared city. The fire that consumed the city was so intense, it vitrified clay and melted metal, a fact confirmed by archaeology. The defeat of the 9th Legion sent shockwaves through the Roman military establishment. Londinium was a target not for its military value, but for its wealth and its symbolism as a Roman economic success. Suetonius's decision to abandon the city was a cold, hard lesson in Roman military pragmatism. Sacrifice a part to save the whole. The Thames River is said to have run red with the blood of Londinium's slaughtered inhabitants. The rebels engaged in ritualistic killings and torture, according to Roman sources, reflecting the deep religious and cultural chasm between the two sides. The sheer number of Boudica's followers became a logistical nightmare, slowing their advance and consuming resources. Suetonius's army, though small, was a self-sufficient, professional killing machine. The final battle's location remains a mystery, debated by historians and archaeologists to this day. Boudica's pre-battle speech emphasized that their cause was just and that the gods were on their side. Britain's initial charge was likely a terrifying sight and sound, a cacophony of horns, shouts, and clashing weapons. The Roman formation, the testudo, or tortoise, could have been used to withstand the initial barrage of stones and missiles. Once the battle was joined at close quarters, the short, stabbing gladius was far superior to the long, slashing Celtic swords in a dense crowd. The psychological impact of the Roman advance, silent, orderly, and relentless, must have been terrifying. The entrapment at the baggage train was a fatal tactical error, born of overconfidence. The scale of the massacre was intended to utterly break any future will to resist Roman rule. Some accounts suggest Boudica fell ill and died, though suicide remains the more accepted and dramatic conclusion. The aftermath saw a new governor, Iulius Classicianus, who clashed with Suetonius over his punitive policies. Classicianus argued that continued brutality would only prolong the conflict and ruin the province economically. His more moderate approach eventually won out, paving the way for decades of relative peace and prosperity. The story of Boudica is a powerful example of how history is written by the victors, as we only have the Roman perspective. her physical appearance, particularly her striking red hair, has become an indelible part of her legend. The name Boudica itself is thought to mean victory in the ancient Brythonic language. Her statue in London faces the Houses of Parliament, a permanent symbol of a challenge to authority. She is often seen as an early feminist icon, a woman who led an army and challenged a patriarchal empire. The rebellion caused a temporary halt in the Roman conquest of Britain, forcing them to consolidate their gains rather than expand. The destruction layer she left behind is a crucial chronological marker for archaeologists studying Roman Britain. Boudica's story has inspired countless books, poems, songs, and films. She represents the eternal struggle between indigenous cultures and imperial powers. Though her rebellion was ultimately crushed, the sheer scale of its initial success remains astonishing. Her actions forced the Roman Empire to fundamentally reassess its strategy for ruling Britain. The memory of her fury served as a cautionary tale for Roman governors for generations to come. The Iceni tribe was effectively wiped from history, its people killed or absorbed into other communities. The trauma of the rebellion was felt on both sides, leaving deep scars on the province. Boudica's chariot, armed with scythes on its wheels, is a popular but likely inaccurate embellishment. Roman historians may have exaggerated her army's size to make their own victory seem more impressive. The rebellion exposed the fragility of the Roman peace, the Pax Romana. The financial crisis caused by Catus Decianus's greed was a key, often overlooked, trigger for the war. The speed of the rebel army was a major factor in its early successes. The lack of a unified command structure among the Britons was a critical weakness. Suetonius's legions were battle-hardened from their campaign against the Druids. The final battle was a textbook example of discipline triumphing over numbers. The story highlights the importance of logistics in warfare. The Britons' lack of a supply chain was unsustainable. Boudica's legacy is a complex mixture of historical fact, Roman propaganda, and later nationalistic myth-making. She remains one of history's most compelling figures, a queen, a mother, a warrior, and an avenger. The initial Roman response was one of disbelief and underestimation. The psychological terror inflicted by the rebels was a weapon in itself. The destruction of the Temple of Claudius was a profound act of sacrilege from the Roman point of view. The rebels made no distinction between Roman military and civilians, viewing all as part of the occupying force. The flight of the 9th Legion's cavalry was a deep stain on its honor. Suetonius's march from Wales to London is considered one of the great forced marches in military history. The decision to abandon citizens was morally questionable, but militarily sound. The wealth of Londinium, derived from trade across the empire, was reduced to worthless ash. The battle site's topography was the Romans' most crucial ally. The Briton warriors fought with immense bravery, but lacked the cohesion of a professional army. The sound of the Roman army, from the tramp of their caligae to the clash of gladius on scutum, was engineered to intimidate. The aftermath was a landscape of ghosts, with entire communities erased from existence. Rome's recovery plan involved not just new administrators, but also significant investment in infrastructure to better control the province. Boudica's story serves as a universal archetype for a leader rising from personal tragedy to lead their people. Her defiance has inspired people fighting for their own freedom across the centuries. Ultimately, the story of Boudica is a tragedy, a tale of violence begetting more violence, with no true winners